Interesting, isn't it?
Hello and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Council. May I first remind you of some domestic arrangements. The toilets are situated outside the meeting room opposite the stairs. Cold water is also available in the breakout area outside the meeting room. If the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting room by following the fire exit signs and meet on the Ipswich Town Football Club training pitch. Do not re-enter the building until you are told it is safe to do so. And please would you switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this room, you are also consented to be filmed by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or for training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film or photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. Finally, can members and officers please ensure that you press the microphone for speaking and turn it off when you have finished. And can I move the agenda, please? Members, I'm moving item 12, the Capital Investment Fund Company, CIFCO, the Business, Trading and Performance Report 2018-19, to further on in the agenda, but to be taken before item 15. All other items will remain the same, in the same order. So, agenda item number 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies so far from Councillor Passmore.
Yes, Councillor Mattson?
Yes, I'm afraid Councillor Amarosan is unable to get here at the moment because of the lack of trains running.
Thank you. Councillor Field?
Councillor Phillips and Norris, I think, have also presented their apologies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You should have Councillor Turner already listed because she's on holiday at the moment.
Item number 2, declarations of interest by councillors. Are there any declarations? Yes, Councillor Brewster.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, on MC 19/16, the CIFCO Capital Ltd. Item.
Thank you. Councillor Epignon.
Similarly, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Mayor.
Madam Chairman, as the previous two.
And Peter, the same.
Exactly the same, thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, MC/19/11, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of June 2019 for accuracy only. Are there any issues with accuracy? Yes, Councillor Otten.
Yes, can I ask why it was not minuted that I asked the leader and yourself why you did not attend the presentation to Chris Fry, who was leaving after 20-odd years. And in fact, Councillor Morley did in fact reply.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Oliver Amarosan was at the meeting and he's not listed as an attendee. Thank you.
Thank you, that can be added. Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I'd just like to correct paragraph 11.5 on page 14. I did not ask about figures for school sites, but stalled sites. That's STALLED, which is what the report was about.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I'm happy to second.
Thank you. Right, we'll take a vote then. Those in favour? As amended. Thank you, that's carried. I'll sign those later. Thank you. So that's agenda item number 4, the Chairman's announcements. I refer you to paper MC/19/12 to be noted. And moving on to agenda item number 5, the Leader's announcements. I would like to invite Councillor Morley to present her tabled update.
Thank you, Chair.
I've submitted my report to you and I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Eburn? No, sorry. That's all.
Thank you. I'd just like to comment on your item number 6 of your report about the portfolio reports, and I just wondered whether it would be easier for us and possibly other people if they were not, all the portfolio reports were not brought to the same meeting. It would be much better if we could have 1 or 2 each meeting at quarterly intervals, each one, because otherwise we end up having an awful lot of things to question the portfolio holders on in one particular meeting. And I thought that's what we had discussed some time ago, but it hasn't happened yet. So I wondered if that could be put into your programme of when they're going to be brought forward. We've been looking at aligning the timing of our performance reports with the portfolio holder reports, because very often a lot of the questions that are asked on the portfolio holder reports are actually answered by the performance reports. And at the moment they come to 2 different meetings. One goes to Cabinet and one goes to Council, and in different months. So we're looking at aligning those, and the first one's going to be coming in September. We have not discussed separating them out so that we have two reports each council, but I think that would give us a problem with our performance reporting if we were to do that.
Councillor Eburn?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I could ask the same question that I asked at last council meeting, that whether we could have this, please, in advance and not just 5 minutes in advance, because it's obviously difficult for us then to formulate questions that might arise from what we read on this report. So I'd appreciate it if we could have it further in advance rather than just a few minutes. With regards to item 2, the 5-year housing land supply, please could I ask if we as members could get some advice on how we are dealing with that 5.61 figure, because it's currently being mentioned at in planning committees and at parish councils and so on. And so could we be given some advice as to how we are going to be using that and the certainty of that figure? Thank you very much.
Councillor Morley, would you like to answer that?
Respond.
Right, the answer to the question is that we won't be using that figure until the consultation is complete, and of course it will depend on the responses as to whether we have to deal with any challenges to that figure one way or the other. So as soon as that happens, we will start to be applying that 5.61 if it stays at that figure, which I've no reason to think it's going to shift from that. So, is that a satisfactory answer to your question? I can't give you a date, unfortunately. I can't. I mean, it's a 4-week consultation. The consultation started. Is the 15th of August the end date, something like that. And then I should imagine that it won't be too long after that we will be able to announce that it's a firm figure. Okay.
Councillor Otten?
Yes, on the bin rounds and the changes, I don't know about others, but I have had numerous emails and complaints on that, and certainly not everyone received a notification letter. So I can't altogether agree with you saying it's very successful, but I would really urge the Cabinet member to look at that almost on a day-to-day basis, because it is still causing massive confusion. Thank you.
It is being looked at on a day-to-day basis. There have been a few issues where the bin men or women are new to the rounds. They don't necessarily know all the roads, and some of the little roads have been missed. But we've got extra crews on standby And as soon as anybody contacts us via the website or the customer care line, then bin men are out within a couple of days to resolve the issue. On a normal week, our miss rate is about 50 bins a week. Considering the amount of changes that we've made, which has affected over 70% of our 40,000 domestic bins, then I still believe that missing only 200 is successful.
Councillor Stringer?
Thank you very much. I was expecting there to be a mention of Mid Suffolk's involvement in the Ipswich Northern route consultation, because we're helping to fund it. I was going to ask how much is Mid Suffolk District Council spending on that consultation?
I can't remember. do you know? Perhaps Councillor Hicks can help me out.
It's actually funded through Suffolk public sector leaders from our joint pot rather than individual councils.
Is there any other questions? Okay, moving on to agenda item 6, to receive notifications of petitions in accordance with council procedure rules.
Thank you, Chair. None received.
Item number 7, questions by the public in accordance with council procedure rules.
Again, none received. Thank you.
Agenda item 8, questions by councillors in accordance with council procedure rules. Question number 1, Councillor Mattison to Councillor Fleming.
Yes. Can I just thank Councillor Fleming for the answer?
Would you like to read out your question?
I asked, as indeed I did a few months ago, how many public electric vehicle charging points have actually been installed in Mid Suffolk?
And Councillor Fleming, would you like to read out your answer?
Yes. The answer is 1. But it's a large one. It's one of the fast... It's a fast charger, 50 kilowatt. And that's it's at Needham Lakes in Needham Market. Now, we do have plans for more using the Plug-in Suffolk programme, and we hope to increase coverage. That's part of the agenda that I hope we will be pursuing. But at the moment, in terms of public points, where you can just roll up, I'm afraid it's 1.
Do you have a supplementary question?
I don't suppose we know where these other 2 are additional 3. Have we found out where they are yet?
I don't know that, but I can get back to you. I also do refer anyone with queries to the ZAP map, which provides a very accurate and up-to-date indication of where any type of charge point, public or not, is located.
So moving on to item number 9, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee report. I would like to invite Councillor Wellham to introduce his report, which is for noting. Councillor Epignon.
I don't have a question, Madam Chairman, but I was in attendance at the meeting and it's not recorded.
Councillor Geek.
I press the right button now. Thank you. Could you confirm when the housing delivery action plan is being considered at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee? And as part of this, will Overview and Scrutiny consider who's actually doing the work? Is there a new and a separate team being set up, or are existing staff being seconded to the task? And if the latter is true, then will they be backfilled?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we will be scrutinising the effect of the first 6 months. So we'll be looking at it in January 2020 and I'm sure that staffing will be one of the aspects that we will be looking at. If there is any information that we can glean in the meantime that might be helpful, then obviously we'll pass that on. But the full report to scrutiny is anticipated in January 2020.
Thank you. Councillor Otten, did you have a question?
I'm not sure if the question should go to the Chair of Scrutiny or to the Cabinet Member, but it is part of the Needham Lake development. I know obviously at the moment you're looking at obviously a visitor centre, but I'm just wondering whether it's part of that work, would you be consider looking at whether there could be a wild swimming area within the lake complex? It's something that's extremely popular at the moment, and I think, let's face it, this weather, some of us would have been in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to respond?
Yeah. Yes, well, I wouldn't recommend swimming in Needham Lake at the moment with the amount of ducks. But, however, as an avid wild swimmer myself, I think that if there's any possibility of getting an area that's clean enough and that has enough fresh water running through it, I would be absolutely all for it. I think, you know, obviously there are dangers, there are health and safety issues with wild swimming, but it's something that, let's take a look at it and see if there's anywhere that it might be safely done.
Thank you. Councillor Matheson?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, can I ask the Chair of Scrutiny if they could consider putting onto their work plan a look at our IT service, particularly the sort of download speeds that our staff are experiencing, both here but also at home and in the other places that they work.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Matheson. We will be looking at the work plan for forthcoming months next week. The chairs and vice chairs will be getting together, and if there is something there which we can usefully scrutinise, then we will be suggesting that at the next joint scrutiny meeting, because it is a joint, it will be a joint scrutiny rather than just Mid Suffolk looking at it. But we will look to see if there's anything that we can add value to. Certainly it seems a good idea.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? So moving on to agenda item number 10, the update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With the scrutiny of the 5-year housing land supply and the housing delivery test, would it be appropriate to look at this provision for transit sites for travellers within this? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. The last scrutiny committee meeting, joint scrutiny committee, considered whether or not this was something which we could usefully look at, and a couple of the members of the joint scrutiny committee are looking to see whether there is something we can usefully do around this whole aspect, and we will expect to have some sort of response at the next meeting as to whether or not it's sensible to set up our own task force to have a look at it, or whether we should work with the people who have already been set up as a steering group.
Thank you. Councillor Morley, would you like to add something to that?
Thank you, Chair. I can tell you that as part of the Public Sector Leaders Group, there is, they're looking at gypsy and traveller sites, and it may be as well to wait until they report back to the Public Sector Leaders Group before determining the timing of that.
Thank you, Councillor Morley. Is there any other questions? So moving on to agenda item 10, the update on Mid Suffolk District Council's Police Community Support Officers. I would like to invite Inspector Sean Wakeling to present his verbal update.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, my apologies. I did bring a PowerPoint, but unfortunately I haven't got that in USB format, so that means that I can't share it with you. I think what we've agreed is that should anyone wish to have a look at that, just get in touch with myself or Melanie Yolland, and we'll get it forwarded over to you. So as introduced, I'm Sean Wakeling and I'm the inspector over at Stowmarket, and I cover a great number of parishes where I am. But also what I should say is that the way that Suffolk Police set up our boundaries is somewhat different to the way councils do, and therefore there are a couple of other inspectors that cover areas in Mid Suffolk. So other inspectors do have an input on what happens with the PCSOs. If I may, so that I don't have my back to everyone, is it okay if I sit down but talk you through the process of what's gone on? So first and foremost, our two PCSOs, Bill Butcher and Lizzie Porteous. PCSO Butcher joined us in January of 2019, and PCSO Porteous was in March. This is a 2-year fixed-term contract until the end of January in 2021. And initially, PCSOs were working jointly because PCSO Porteous was new to that role and therefore needed an 8-week tutorship and mentorship with PCSO Butcher. And that's now taken place, and they now work opposite shifts so that there's a greater coverage across the whole of Mid Suffolk. Bear with me. We've also got the two posts there. Sorry, just need to. The way that works is that they're working 5 days a week. Their core hours are from 0800 until 1800, but there's two different shifts. So one is 0800 until 1600, and one is 1000 hours until 1800 hours. Like I say, they try to split their time there, and also they do a week in rural areas, and then they'll do a week in Stowmarket as well. Hopefully this maximises coverage in areas that have got a greater call for it, i.e. the bigger towns have a large call, but also it then does mean that those other outlying rural areas get service as well. They've got access to vehicles and bicycles, but most patrols are undertaken in the cars, and then obviously a large amount on foot as well. Their workloads consist of proactive and reactive taskings. They're dictated by the Mid Suffolk District Council referrals, which I'll talk through in a second, and they're what I call role appropriate CADs. So obviously if it's something that comes into us which is more appropriate for a police officer to deal, then obviously we won't be sending them. So the referral process involves councillors completing a PCSO referral form, providing details to us that are of concern, and sending it through the community's safe officers, Melanie Yolland, Gwen Taylor, via the referral form. And that can be found on the members area Connect on the in-house intranet. Referrals are logged, then referred to the named contact into us in the police for a review, and as long as it fits the remit that's sort of been agreed of the PCSO's duties, then they'll be tasked to look into that. Once the matter's been investigated, PCSO will complete the summary of action taken, in turn provide feedback to the council or the clerk who submitted it, and then that can be reported back to the individual who's initially raised that concern. So that's the sort of staggered process that we go through there. Also, from mid-May, it's worth mentioning that we've allowed that process, or made that process available to parish clerks as well, so parish councils can raise concerns. I did have a slide for you where all of the referrals have been highlighted, so I'll talk you through them now. Rickinghall, Elmswell, Ringshall, Mendlesham, Hawley, Stowmarket, Stow Upland, Stradbroke, Debenham, Finborough, Walsham the Willows, Rattlesden and Needham Market. Now, whilst that is a good number of referrals from different areas, there are still others that haven't, and I don't know if that's because at this juncture we haven't had calls to, or if people aren't aware of how they go about that referral process. So that's why I thought it was pertinent to remind you all of how that process works, and should you need to, then you now know how. So monthly performance reports are completed by the PCSOs. They detail the numbers of parking tickets, advisory issues, intelligence reports, any good news stories, those types of things that they've been doing and what they've been involved in. And we send them on to our communities officers as well. That does help create an audit trail, and also just keeps us in line with what our service level agreement was. Again, I've got some statistics for you. I don't want to bore anyone, but total to date in terms of parking tickets, we're at 237, and advisory notices we're at 25. There've been a large number in Church Walk and Ipswich Road, where there were some parking restrictions, and 65% of PCSO referrals received have been for parking-related concerns. Parking outside schools continues to be an issue at various localities, and we take those on board, and obviously get in touch with the schools and try to do our best to resolve those issues as well as we can. Speeding is obviously a big issue as well in terms of concerns for people, and we've sent out in excess of 60 warning letters to people, which I think are quite impactful. I've got a strong belief in that. Intelligence reports is one that's really important to us, especially in our bigger areas like Stowmarket, because they can be really instrumental in us having an impact on county lines and drug dealing. And between the two of them, they've submitted over 44 intelligence reports, 30 of which do relate to county lines and drug dealing. High visibility patrols are always conducted where possible. They attend regular community engagements with the elderly and vulnerable communities. These include the Jam Pot, Needham Market Internet Cafe, County Market, Avenues East, and Thorndon Coffee Morning, Walsham the Willows Coffee Morning, the Community Hub, and Meet Up Mondays in various different locations. They undertake a number of reassurance inputs, various events and local concerns, things such as at Stowmarket High School, they've been there for OPSEPTA and knife crime that we've been trying to assist in educating young people about. They've been to Starkland High School in relation to bullying. So Robert Hitchin Primary had some issues with kids taking sweets and stationery from one another. So it was right for Bill and Lizzie to get involved there. And like I said, they go to Meet Up Mondays and a few other things as well. There are a couple of case studies that they've provided me with, or sort of good news stories, if you like. So I'll just go over them because they're really keen for me to tell you all what they've been up to. So, and they really do a great job. So following a referral on the 4th of June, Prentice Road was visited every day for the week, and the referral with frequent visits thereafter. It meant that multiple tickets were issued over the month, and this appears to have made a really noticeable difference, as cars are no longer parking on the double yellow lines, and Prentice Road has added to the PCSO's parking patrol routes, which they've created as well. So they've got regular areas where they'll go and patrol. They attended Crucial Crew, which I think probably most of you would be aware of, but they've assisted in the delivery of that. It's a massive sort of engagement project where we speak with young people and basically provide a lot of safety advice on a range of subjects, from gangs to being befriended online. And I think they sent that out or had interactions with over 1,000 pupils, so lots and lots of interaction there that was really, really well received. There was some concerns in Hawley over some unsafe parking by HGVs and trailers. Visit was undertaken, and we had some communications with the company there, who quickly got those issues sorted and rectified, they realised they needed to find alternatives. I think we were the catalyst to helping them get that done a little bit sooner rather than later. So yeah, there are a number of different things that Bill and Lizzie have been up to. From my perspective, it's been great to have them working. Lizzie, for example, who was new to this role, has taken to it like a duck to water and is really thriving, especially now that she's on her own. She's able to generate her own workload as well as be receiving those referrals. Bill is someone that's got a lot of experience, and that experience has really helped in the Mid Suffolk area. He certainly knows how to get out and about and really has worked hard to know his patch. So I'm very pleased with both of them. They take on a great deal of work. From my perspective, it's great to have them, and long may it continue.
Thank you very much. Are you happy to answer questions?
Yeah, I'll do my best, certainly will.
Thank you very much. Councillor Humphrey?
Madam Chair, thank you. It's not really a question, it's a vote of thanks, really. I don't think I'm alone within this chamber to say thank you. Thank you for your service, and thank you for PCSOs. It's a real success story. In Stowmarket, they're making a massive difference. They're visible, they're effective, and above all, they're really popular. So PCSO, Butcher and Porteous, they're the face of the police force, and they're doing an incredible job. So thank you for your service, and long may it continue.
Thank you very much. I know that I'm seeing both of them tomorrow, so I've told them I'll give them a little debrief on how the meeting goes, and to hear things like that will really boost their confidence and continue to ensure that it carries on.
Thank you. Councillor Fleming?
Me?
Did you have a question? Sorry.
Did you? I did, yes, I thought you did. Yeah. Right, I just wanted to... Thank you for sending, PCSO Butcher came up to Rickinghall when we had some trouble with antisocial behaviour there. And he's been really helpful and has actually gone and visited families. And that's exactly what we need and what has been lacking. I would like to say that we did think it would be very nice if the PCSO daily schedule could be shifted a little bit so they had more evening time and came on a bit later and maybe could leave later in the evening. So I suppose I'm posing more of a long-term query to you. Is there any flexibility, particularly in summer months, in enabling them to shift their schedule so that they could work a little bit later and therefore maybe cover some of the evening antisocial behaviour that can go on?
Yeah, I understand that is something that people would like to see. Unfortunately, with the contracts as they are, and the way that it's not just about those two individuals, because obviously they're part of a wider group of PCSOs, some of which aren't funded, it becomes a much bigger question for all. In the past, obviously that was the case, and then it was changed. So I won't say that it will never happen again, but I think it's unlikely in the near future.
Thank you. Councillor Flatman?
Mine too is a vote of thanks. Stradbroke School has been visited, and other schools, other high schools went to that meeting, and I think Hartesmere were quite impressed as well, so thank you. That was drug related. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really positive feedback. What I will say is that please don't be afraid to tell me, I'm sure you wouldn't, but if there are any areas where you think we can improve or what we could do better, I am keen to hear those things as well. So even if that doesn't come at this point or there's nothing raised, of course, in the future, if there are things, you can get through myself and just let us know where we can continue to improve, because that will be what the goal is. And just to come back to your point, although they are funded and there are set hours, of course, being the neighbourhood inspector myself, I do consider the bigger picture, and I do have resources that are able to work later. So it's not just that these two PCSOs are the only option for us to deal with those types of issues. And if it is right, and again, you'll have heard this time and time again, but if the threat and harm and risk is enough to sanction us or warrant us sending resources at those types of times to make sure that we can be impacted, then we will do.
Councillor Muller?
Yes, I would like to concur exactly with what everybody else says, but I'm also a local police volunteer, so I do work quite closely with some members of Sean's team. And in addition to the two PCSOs, I would like to pass on my sincere thanks to PC Stefan Hendrickson, who I do have quite a lot of dealings with, passing on information from residents, was extremely helpful. And I can assure you, Sean, that the residents really appreciate the help he's been able to give as well. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Wellham?
Sorry, could I just take a second to respond to that? Just because, yeah, again, that's another thing that is a relatively new role, and Stefan is our engagement officer, so it's great to hear that people feel like his role has got a good value, and I think hopefully it makes people feel a bit like the old days in terms of having that regular point of contact and knowing who the person is to go to, and yet at the same time, from a policing perspective, we're still able to get on with what is our more core business, if you like, but we have an understanding of what people's concerns are. We're still at a point where we won't always be able to take action against those concerns with immediacy, but the more they're reported and the more we understand and build our intelligence picture, then we are actually able to respond. And I know that there was something recently that Steph took hold of in the Cedars area that we took a grip of, and it's been very helpful to have people come forward and help and give us information in that respect. So thank you, Dave, and I'll pass on the congrats to Steph.
Councillor Wellham?
Thank you, Chair. If it's not too boring, can I say thank you as well? Thank you for coming along to Stow Upland High School. I think both of the PCSOs came along to Stow Upland High School. I think they need a return visit. It's probably the case with all schools that a return visit in September will be necessary, just to see whether there's been any effect or whether everybody's forgotten everything over the summer holidays. I've got one or two other queries. You said that parish clerks can refer. I hadn't realised that until we had a report back to the Old Newton parish clerk. Now, I don't think Old Newton was on your list. Perhaps that's because it was the parish clerk who informed you. Will the ward member be informed when the referral is made? Because we knew nothing about it until the end of the procedure. Could I ask for a breakdown of referrals between, say, rural, urban, not this minute, rural, urban, and Stowmarket? Because it seems a lot of the time seems to be taken up in Stowmarket, which is good. Quite a number, 237 parking tickets, possibly most of them in Stowmarket. But I think we who are in the rural areas have got to be a bit careful, because to most residents out in the sticks, they don't really care if there's parking problems in Stowmarket, because they rarely go there. So yeah, whilst that's, I guess from your point of view, that's a good thing, and Stowmarket members will think it's a good thing, it does seem a lot of time is taken up with something which doesn't put lives at risk generally. Sorry, I've got two more questions. One is to do with speeding referrals. Can PCSOs initiate speeding tickets? I understand that all they can do is initiate warning letters. And you spoke about drug dealing. I guess that if we know about, or if we're concerned about potential drug dealing, we still ring the police, we don't put in a PCSO referral. Sorry, it's a long list of questions.
No, it's no problem. I will try to answer as many as I can remember, but if not, then just jog my memory. So starting in reverse order, I guess. Absolutely, let us know, and not by the referral process, and we'll essentially triage that piece of information and decide at what level it needs to go in at. I won't again, take up too much of your time explaining all of that. But yes, if drug dealing activity is seen, let us know. I mean, it can just be a simple email into the S&T box, but to the point where if you think it is so serious or people are in danger, it could warrant a 999 call, although unlikely, I would say. It's more of an intelligence building thing, and if we have the resources, we would deal with it at that juncture as well. So yes, please do let us know. No, PCSOs can't issue fixed penalty notices in relation to speeding, but as you say, those warning letters are something that can be issued and can go out. And again, I know some people say, oh, it's a shame that they can't, be actually given fines. I understand that perspective. Personally, I think it's quite a positive thing because you can alienate members of public when they're given speeding fines, and in this way, it's kind of like a reminder and a let-off, if you like, to the individual. But hopefully they don't repeat that same mistake again. So I do think it does have a place, and I do value what they do there. Where were we before that one? The balance between the parking.
Rural and two things: parking and other things, and rural and urban. Yeah.
So I think the answer to that is that actually the two sort of go hand in hand to a certain extent. So as I said, they will do a week in each. Now I appreciate when you're doing a week in rural, that means half a day in some areas or a day in areas, whereas Stowmarket do get that whole week. And there will always be a difficulty in striking a balance that sits right with people, and obviously those in Stow will say great, and those in rural will say we want you more. You have to try and balance it somehow, whether you do it by sort of like a demand process or whether you do it by a sort of a population process. I personally feel we have got it about right, but it is something that we would be happy to review. And of course, our aim is to try and keep everyone happy, not just Stowmarket or not just those rural areas. So it would be something that we'd be prepared to look at, but I personally feel at the moment that it is about where we would want it to be. And of course, to bring me on to the sort of parking point, what I would say in relation to that would be, yes, I know that doesn't offer a lot of threat, harm and risk, but the reality of these roles is that's kind of what the money is being spent on, because the rhetoric has been that we haven't been focusing on those types of issues. Our response is that we just can't do that in this day and age, but here's an option that does cover that for you. However, it comes where you would need to contribute in order to achieve it. So I think that if that's a problem in Stowmarket's area and that's what they'd like to be looked at, then we're more than prepared to do that, and they'll put some good work into it. If that's not what is required in other rural areas, and Rick and Hall tell us that they've got an ASB problem, then we'll come up there and we'll focus our attentions on the ASB. So it's really just about us looking at the diverse issues in different areas and trying to deal with them as they're presented.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson.
Sorry, there was one other question which I think Melanie probably will deal with. And by way of coming back, will the parking tickets arrangement, will that change with civil enforcement?
Okay. There's two questions I was going to answer. I was going to answer the one about the notification of the councillors as well. In relation to the parking, my understanding is the enforcement is coming in October 2019, so I think everything will be looked at after that date, unless I'm wrong. And in relation to notification of to ward councillors and district councillors, we opened it up in June this year, the comms centre paragraph out to advise parish and town councils directly that they could actually make referrals into the PCSOs via us. It's open to not just the parish clerks, it is open to all of the parish and town councillors as well. And what we've started to do is actually notify the district councillors that referrals have been been referred. You know, things have come into the PCSOs just so that you are aware of what's going on in your parishes and your towns. So that will continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to jump on the bandwagon a little bit and say thank you both for your very interesting report, but also for the hard work that you and your colleagues do. I mean, my dad was an inspector in Suffolk Constabulary for many years, so I know from personal experience exactly how hardworking and determined our PCs and our PCSOs are. But I do have a couple of questions. First is with regards to a similar question about whether you've received a referral from Thurston Parish Council. My understanding is there should have been a referral about antisocial behaviour, so I didn't think that was on your list, so I just wanted to query that with you. And then secondly, about the two PCSOs in question, is will there be an opportunity for us to meet both Bill and Lizzie? Because as a, excuse me, as a new councillor myself, it would be fantastic to meet them, to both thank them for their work, but also to get a better understanding of the kind of issues that they deal with in our communities and to kind of understand exactly where those issues lie.
In relation to the Thurston question, that's something that we can just double check for you. Obviously, it's not on my list, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it hasn't come in. So we'll double check that and get back to you. In relation to meeting them, I can't see why we wouldn't be able to do that. But again, we have to work within their time parameters of what they do. Yeah, just a small agenda about kind of what you'd like to put to them, perhaps, just so that they've got a rough idea of what to expect. But yeah, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to meet.
Thank you. Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question is for the portfolio holder, whichever one of you is responsible, as it were. My understanding is we're funding this for a period of 2 years. And what are the measurement criteria as to whether it's a success? Because obviously, you know, you can hear from people in the chamber that to date, we're all suggesting that it is a successful way to go. But at what point do we then say, do we review it? Do we see, you know, because obviously we don't want to get to the end of the 2 years and stop. So do we review it at a certain point? What are the criteria and how would we decide whether we would continue funding it? Thank you very much.
Councillor Morley, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you. We are looking at it periodically as we go along, and we will keep all the statistics, and there's no reason why we wouldn't fund it again, but we will look at what it has achieved before the 2 years is up. Is that okay?
Just to add to that, we are going to be collecting performance metrics now that we've had our first report, and so we'll be looking at those to determine what the impact has been. And hopefully, rather than you distribute your report to all councillors, perhaps I can ask Melanie if you put it on our website with the referral form, and then everybody can help themselves.
Just to say, as part of the service level agreement, we did actually set some performance measures right at the very beginning, so they are actually clearly stated in the service level agreement. So what I'll do is I'll show you that information, share that with you, and then obviously you can have the statistics and things to go with it, and obviously some of the information from the reports as well. So.
Councillor Hicks. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mattison.
For coming and answering so many questions. Can you come back next year? And also, you mentioned Church Walk. I wondered whether you're paying particular attention to other places where there are blue badge parking, such as Marriott's Walk and Crow Street. And second question, are they able to deal with moving traffic issues or not?
The honest answer is that I don't know in relation to the blue badge areas that you've mentioned. They do have parking patrol areas, and it may be on that list that they've got. What I would suggest is just popping in the referral, and then that will ensure that they do have a look at that. But I can also just double check with them tomorrow. in relation to moving traffic offences, what sort of things are you thinking of?
Thank you. Yeah, the two prohibited left turns which try to discourage through traffic in Ipswich Street Shopping Centre.
So that they could essentially look to stop or ask a vehicle to stop, or they could take down details. Might be something that I could discuss with them to just observe, obtain details, and we could do those warning letters again. That might be a way that we look to initially deal with it, rather than some stringent enforcement, and then we could decide whether or not it needed to be up to level. I think would probably be where I'd prefer to come in at that lower level, and then.
Let's have two more questions and then we'll draw this to a close. Councillor Epignon.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Inspector, I happen to be in receipt of communications from your good self about the issue of which would appear to be related to county lines, and I guess my question is that I can understand that things are being done, but my residents are concerned that there is no visibility of actions being taken, and there are certain hotspots in Stowmarket that continue to produce problems for the local residents, and I'd like to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, I can understand how that must be frustrating for yourself and at this juncture for your residents, or probably for a prolonged period of time. It is very difficult for you to just place total trust in me that when I say we are dealing with it, we are dealing with it, because until there's some tangible action seen, then that's just difficult for people to place their faith in us, and I understand that. One sort of mitigating circumstance that I'll put in is that I've had a recent change in the structure of my S&T team, and that is in the form of losing both of my sergeants who had a good level of experience and understanding and knowledge of the area. So I've got two new sergeants who are both equally capable and enthusiastic. Just come away from a meeting with them earlier on today in relation to that area. We've got some really good things that we're going to be putting into practice and place that will increase visibility, but you will also see a longer term change there if we are successful in what we're trying to do. So again, I'm trying to tell you something without telling you everything. I appreciate that's difficult, but it certainly is well on our radar, and in terms of our priorities, it is number one.
Right, lastly, Councillor Otten. Oh, right. I'd just like to thank you again for coming and, for giving us a very informative chat and all these questions. So thank you again.
No problem, you're welcome, and I'll see you soon.
So moving to agenda item number 11, MC/19/15, Equality and Diversity Policy. I'd like to invite Councillor Morley to introduce this paper and to move the recommendation in the report.
Thank you, Chair. Members, I present to you an Equality and Diversity Policy which demonstrates the Council's commitment to embedding the Equality Act 2010, which includes a public sector equality duty for the right of individuals to be treated equally and fairly. The Equality Act 2010 brought together over 116 separate pieces of legislation into one single act, providing a legal framework to protect the rights of individuals in advancing equality of opportunity for all. Since the introduction of the Act, there have been many changes to the legislation, and functional and supportive guidance has been provided to public authorities. It is therefore timely to bring in a policy to support and provide guidance, including duties and responsibilities in respect to the 9 protected characteristics, and to cement the way in which we are carrying out our duties in line with the Act. As a council, we have agreed that using equality impact assessments is the most effective way to demonstrate that we have paid due regard. These are completed alongside a screening process for our major decisions and identify the impacts of any proposed changes have been considered according to the protected characteristics. Our communities are becoming more diverse and we support and foster good relations between protected groups. It is important that our policies and service delivery reflect both these diverse and sometimes similar needs. This also includes our workforce and our commitment to ensure all officers feel included and play their part in making the council great places to live, work and visit. This equality and diversity policy is an overarching document that embeds best practice of equality and diversity and is supported by guidance and resource. This topic will continue to evolve and councils are asked to recommend to Cabinet the approval of this policy to demonstrate our commitment to support and promote the diversity of our communities in accordance with the Act. I would like to move the recommendation on page 15 to recommend Council adopts the Equality and Diversity policy which meets the Council's responsibilities under the Equality Act 2010 and would ask for a seconder. Thank you.
Could I have a seconder? Thank you.
Madam Chair, I would like to second the recommendation as stated in the paper.
This is now open for question and debate. Councillor Scarf.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, I definitely welcome the introduction of this equality and diversity policy in this format, but can I give you a particular example? Recently we had a Baber and Mid Suffolk Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee where we were discussing, amongst other issues, staff turnover and welfare and the particular types of illness related to that. At that meeting, quite horrifically, a member from, not this council, fortunately, but a member from Baber actually started querying about sickness due to pregnancy. Now, in this day and age, that is completely unacceptable. We all had, and I have to say that member was ruled out of order by Baber's scrutiny chairman instantly, although that didn't stop him trying to press home the issue. We've all had training at this council and Baber as well, but I would suggest that perhaps some of the councillors need a refresher on this because pregnancy sickness is not an illness and that is a direct, to my mind, against pregnancy or maternity, which is one of our protected characteristics in this policy. So, whilst I welcome the fact that we're introducing this policy, there are some members from both councils, possibly, that actually need to do a lot more on this. And I would suggest if that councillor in particular, and I shan't embarrass him by naming him, hasn't undergone the equality and diversity policy training, then they should do.
Would you like to respond to that?
Thank you for your support, Councillor Scarf. Equality and diversity training is mandatory for all councillors, and if this particular person has not yet been on the training, he soon will be.
Councillor Otten.
Thank you very much. I'm slightly surprised that the council did not already have such an equality and diversity policy in place. So if that's the case, then obviously we're absolutely delighted that it is now, and I have no doubt will be approved. But just for information, I am a member of the County Council's Equality Inclusion Board, and as part of that, there are a series of networks. For example, there is the Women's Network, there is the Vegan Network, the LGBT networks, young people. And I believe, in fact, some from Mid Suffolk are already joining those. So I think it'd be a really good idea if we as a council can advertise that and promote it. And if those are, available to members and staff, then it seems ridiculous if they're taking place in this building that not everybody, that everybody has the opportunity to join them. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor, I'm very happy to publicise that.
Thanks very much. Just a quick question, really. The document, and of course we welcome this, and like Councillor Austin, I'm surprised there isn't something already in place, but if there isn't, at least we've now got there, so fantastic. The only thing I ask is that under bullet point 5, we talk about staff professional development, and under 4.2, we talk about all new staff, but we don't talk in this document at all about councillors. And I think we should have a paragraph in here about actually, because it's not just staff, it's staff and councillors together. It's a joint working, and we should both be included. So I would just ask, I don't think it needs to come back, but I think we ought to have some insertion in there about mentioning councillors in the report as well.
Is there any other questions or comments? So we'll move to the recommendation then. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Item number 12, which has been moved to item 15, so forgive me. Item number 13, councillor appointments. Are there any changes to placings? Councillor Morley.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to propose substituting Councillor Haddingham for Councillor Richardson on the Health and Wellbeing Board. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder?
I'm happy to second, Chair.
That's carried. Item number 14, motions on notice. I would like to invite Councillor Fleming to move the motion.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to bring this climate change motion to Mid Suffolk Council this evening. And you've all seen the wording, probably, but I will read it out for the benefit of anyone who hasn't seen it. It says, this council pledges to declare a climate emergency, to set up a task force commencing in September 2019 to examine ways in which Baber and Mid Suffolk, actually, strictly speaking, that's Mid Suffolk in our case, will respond to the climate change challenge on a spend-to-save basis, with the ambition to make Baber and Mid Suffolk councils carbon neutral by 2030. To work with partners across the county and region, including the LEP, public sector leaders and others, towards the aspiration of making the county of Suffolk carbon neutral by 2030, and to work with government to deliver its 25-year environmental plan and increase the powers and resources available to local authorities to make the 2030 target easier to achieve. Well, there must be few of us in this room who doesn't recognise that we are living beyond our means. Awareness is growing about this dilemma, and it's particularly evident in young people, who often show an instinctive sense of unease about life in general, and has been identified by some psychologists now as a form of environmental-induced mental stress. I see it in a lot of the young people in my own family. The problem is not just about the nature of our activities, it's also about scale. There are almost twice the number of people living on Earth now than when I was born. It must put me back a bit, actually. And proportionately, they're living much more extravagantly. For instance, the other day I saw in the paper that in 1996, 19,000 people visited Venice from cruise ships. And last year, 1.7 million did the same thing. As most of us know, the antidote to worry is action. And I'm very pleased that action is starting now. In addition to our government declarations of climate change emergency, these are being made in other countries throughout the world. And in the UK, at least 85 local and regional 1- or 2-tier authorities have passed climate emergency motions. The list is growing. Suffolk County Council declared an emergency in June and brought a paper to Cabinet in July setting out how the county proposes to go about responding. There is a clear role for all Suffolk County Councils to work together to achieve real progress, and I look forward to bringing Mid Suffolk into that framework to develop and coordinate environmental action in this county and through the region. So what next? What are we going to do about this? We, as a district council, intend to implement this motion by setting up, firstly, a task force along with our colleagues at Baber. We will respond to the climate change challenge in the widest sense, aiming for carbon neutrality by 2030, and taking into account the relevant Sustainable Development Goals that support the key UN Goal 13, which addresses climate change. We'll work with our partners, that is the County Council, the Greenest County Board, the New Anglia LEP, and other local authorities and organisations, and specialist groups which may be involved in energy efficiency, biodiversity and conservation. We'll support the government's 25-year plan and seek to undertake the changes and adjustments that will be necessary, and we will report back to Cabinet and full Council. This is all about changing course. We cannot expect a different result if we keep doing the same thing. Growth in the natural world balances decay. It enables change to happen and life to carry on. This is the spirit in which we must couple our need for economic growth with our responsibility to maintain quality of life. This is part of my vision for Suffolk, and I hope you share it, as a place which is prosperous but not greedy, that takes responsibility for its actions and is willing to lead on making positive changes. I ask you all to consider and support this motion today.
Could I have a seconder? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second this proposal.
So we now move into debate and questions. Councillor Mellon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sure we're all very well aware that outside this council chamber, the UK is experiencing possibly its highest ever temperature today, and we've seen weather records being broken across Europe in the last couple of days. I know we're talking particularly about weather and not climate, but we are living in unprecedented days where the climate change is becoming a reality in our daily lives. We on this side welcome the declaration of a climate emergency, and perhaps people might have wondered if that proposal, that motion, would have come from us on this side as the Green Party. You may think that you've taken our policy, or perhaps in an analogy you understand on that side, you've shot our fox. What does this mean, though? What does it mean to declare a climate emergency? The Russians have a proverb which goes something like this: fine words butter no parsnips. And words without actions to back them up are meaningless. Let me give you a quote from Sir David Attenborough, perhaps our most well-known environmentalist. Climate change is the greatest threat that humanity has ever faced. I would love to give you a quote from our new Prime Minister on this, but in his words in Downing Street yesterday, the greatest threat that humanity has ever faced did not even get a mention. Now, it's often said that we need to look for the solutions to climate change. Friends, I have to tell you, we already have those solutions. We have those answers already. And they are exactly the policies and practices that me and my colleagues on this side of the chamber have been advocating for years. We already know how to build carbon neutral homes. We just need to have the political will to set higher building standards and enforce them. We already know how to reduce the impact of vehicle emissions. Is by encouraging people to walk, to cycle, to use public transport, rather than building new roads. We already know how to power our economy with renewables, and it's cheaper than nuclear. We know how to boost wildlife in our countryside by beefing up corridors, building in transit points for wildlife into developments, and providing the staffing needed in the relevant council departments, and we'll come to that later. If we really do see climate change as an emergency, which I believe it is, then in 1,000 ways, in a multitude of decisions, we need to have it at the forefront of our minds and be making the right decisions. Our communities require it. Our children deserve it. We welcome this declaration, but we wait to see the reality in the policy and practice of the council. Business as usual and tinkering with what we do will not be enough. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Councillor Field.
Thank you. And I think I'll keep this brief and not try and lecture you all on things you totally understand already. My point would just be that the Lib Dem, Green and Independent group at the council introduced a motion of this type there, and it was passed almost totally unanimously. It's hardly something we're going to oppose here, is it? We're obviously going to be totally in support. We obviously do also agree that it does need real action, that the committee set up must move, must do things effectively. It's not to be just words to keep us all feeling comfortable. But I'm sure that is not the case. I have to admit I have some slight suspicions about the words that say spend to save basis. I hope that means spend to save the planet or spend to save carbon. It doesn't mean we have to prove that we save money before we spend. But assuming the wider understanding of those words, I think this group is totally in support.
Thank you. Councillor Humphreys.
Madam Chair, thank you. I won't make this too-party political. Climate change and everything that goes with it isn't green, it isn't yellow, it isn't blue, and it isn't red. It's everybody. We're all in the same planet, we all have the same feelings, we all express the same desires as you do. This government, actually the UK government, has led the world to try and reduce carbon activity and to help with climate change. And that's a fact. But it's a whole government, it's a whole people. Everybody's on board. This is a step in the right direction. The word action in there is good as well. The fact that we're going to form this task group to go out and examine what's going on so we can come at some credible ways in which we improve the area of Mid Suffolk District Council to help the world, to help this county, to help this district. It's not you, it's not us, it's all of us.
Councillor Caston.
It's a fact now that science has proved that human activity on this planet has seriously exacerbated climate change. I don't think anyone can deny that now. I'm a Conservative, and the idea of a Conservative is you conserve things. You always try and take something and pass it on to the next generation better than you found it. So I think our government, the Conservative government, I'm very proud of what they've done. In 2017, we had the lowest greenhouse emissions since 1988. They need to do more. They are doing more. They're an inspiration to other countries. I'd like this council to be an inspiration to other councils with what we do with this task and finish group, if this motion is approved. I think it might be, though. And I wish them a great deal of success, and I'd like to be involved in that as much as I possibly can.
Thank you. Councillor Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to spend too long talking about this. Obviously, we believe the spirit of the motion, but of course some of the words are slightly challenging depending how you interpret them. I'd like to pick up on the spend to save basis. Are we honestly saying that if it cost £1 to hit carbon neutrality in 2030, we wouldn't do it? Come on. But I'll take it in terms of to save the wider environment. I think we need to be really cautious about being very self-congratulatory about what the country does. It is true our own emissions in this country have gone down, but because we've offshored so many of our manufacturing bases, that's how we're then able to then offset that somehow. the planet doesn't care where you offset the emission to, it cares about the emission. So if we truly want to show the world how to do it, we've got to close loop some of this stuff a little bit more, be a little bit more forensic with our examination. And also the question was, well, why haven't the Greens put a motion like this? In fact, we did precisely a year ago, and it was ruled out by the administration, not the councillors, by the governance as being too ambitious, and it was an area that we couldn't influence within our budget, I think that's what we were told. But anyway, glad to see there's a motion of sorts has come. Happy to go along with it, but we will obviously be watching you like a hawk in terms of making sure that this aspiration turns into perspiration.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, in terms of making the difference between what we say we're going to do and what we actually do, the development of the Ipswich Northern route will no doubt contribute substantial amounts of carbon dioxide. How does the project fit in with the objective to being carbon neutral by 2030? And shouldn't it just be scrapped?
Councillor Morley, would you like to answer that?
The Ipswich Relief Road is not the subject for Mid Suffolk to discuss. It's a county council initiative, and we await the results of the consultation that are taking place at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. I too welcome this motion, but just in terms of what countries around the world are doing, China, for example, is planting an area the size of Ireland in trees every year. So, if we can kind of do the equivalent in Mid Suffolk in scale, then I think that would be a great achievement. What I would like to see really is the task force being set up in this September. Could we have some really close, definite guidelines in terms of how long the task force goes for, what it's delivering, so it doesn't kind of go on, ad infinitum, that we actually have some clear targets that we're hitting, and that there's a shorter time frame as possible, and that we can then from that embed within everything that we do the results of this. I know that on the reports that we have to date, we have environmental implications, but I'd rather that didn't become a tick box, that people really think about the work that we're doing as a district council, how is that impacting climate change, and what are we doing about it, and be embedded in everything that we do. So my question really, Chair, is the task force, what's the time frame, and can it deliver quickly? Thank you.
Councillor Morley, would you like to answer that? Councillor Fleming.
As the proposer, I can probably answer it. I think I'm not going to give a definite time frame for the duration of the task force. My estimate would be it would report back to Council and Cabinet within 6 months. It would be, and I envision here, a cross-party task force involving both Baber and Mid Suffolk members, and we would look very widely at what we can do in Mid Suffolk. It may seem fairly humble, but there are some real things that we can do differently. I've got some ideas, and I look forward to sharing them with other people on or off the task force. And I see it as a great opportunity to collaborate with other local authorities, both in Suffolk and across the UK. So I really see this as something that will give us the tools to make the changes that I think we all want to make.
Councillor Richard.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to make a slightly a broader point, which I think was touched upon in Councillor Fleming's comments about the general well-being of our communities. Because personally, I work in the NHS for a national body, and I'm acutely aware of the relationship between things like air pollution and the subsequent NHS spend on respiratory medicine. And so I really want to commend this motion and the impact that it will have if we do declare a climate change emergency and do take strong initiatives to be carbon neutral by 2030. I think that the benefits we can reap from that are not just in relation to the environment, but actually can have a much wider benefit upon our wider communities and in the health and well-being of the people that we represent. And so I'd just like to make that point, which is, I don't think has been mentioned that much, but the impact on quality of life and the subsequent impact on people's health can be really, really improved by this motion and the actions that this council can take. So I really welcome this initiative.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To say that I'm pleased to see this motion is an understatement. I think it's a relief that we're beginning to recognise the seriousness of the situation we're in. We've had decades of human activity which has created the present situation. We have dug ourselves a huge hole globally with regards to the environment, and this motion, I think, recognises the need to not only stop digging, but to start thinking about filling that hole in. I am, however, concerned, it has been mentioned previously, about the inclusion of the phrase spent to save. For me, it's obvious, it's spending to save the environment. Perhaps it's to do with the carbon footprint, emissions, or does it imply that we're just spending to save money? I think we do need to be very clear about this. It is very difficult to put a value on what measures we undertake to protect, conserve, improve our environment. Whatever money that is spent now, the benefits of this investment may not be measured in percentages. It might not be seen for decades. We cannot put a value on it. I would be very comfortable if this motion did not have that phrase in it, because I do not think simple economics can be put into it. It is about value, and I recognise what Councillor Richardson has just said. It is about the well-being of the people in our communities and globally. So I think I would like to propose an amendment, if possible, that that phrase be omitted from the motion.
Do you have a seconder? Thank you. So we have to debate the amendment. Councillor Geek, you did want to speak. Would you like to, kick that off? Does anyone want to speak on the amendment? Jessica, would you like to accept the amendment?
No, I don't accept the amendment. I'm sorry.
So we'll go to debate on the amendment. Councillor Eburn, Manson, would you like to speak?
Thank you. Well, perhaps if you're not willing to accept it, can you actually reiterate what you actually mean by the phrase to spend to save?
Councillor Fleming.
What do I mean by spend to save? I mean the financial investments that are made by the council need to have some tangible benefit to the people of Mid Suffolk.
Councillor Manson, would you like to come back?
Could I, again, a tangible is another word that is a little bit subjective. So I'd like a little bit more detail about what you mean by tangible, because, it is a very subjective word. What is a tangible reward?
Well, I don't think this is a matter for cost accounting, because that would be a waste of time. I think we all know that what it means is there has to be a control on the costs, because we don't have unlimited money. It means that investments need to have some economic benefit as well as some environmental benefit to the people of Suffolk. And economic benefit can be a very indirect thing. A health benefit is potentially an economic benefit. I think when you put costs on things that are essentially qualitative, you run into a lot of trouble, and that's not something I advocate doing. I think we all know when an investment pays off, and that is the spirit in which I would like us to take this motion forward.
Councillor Carter.
I would have thought that the continuation of existence on this planet was quite a tangible benefit that we could all recognise right now, so, especially members of the climate strikes, Friday climate strikes. So actually, you will see out of schools, Ipswich and things, where it is highly recognised the importance of what we do today. But there is again, there's the economic benefits. Going back to the health point, how we were actually, what we are spending now on the NHS for airborne pollution diseases, the cost of asthma due to pollution, well, we would be having a considerable save on that by actually improving air quality right now. Also, if you have heard the term green prescriptions, where mental health benefits of actually having trees around and nature, where you actually have some doctors who will tell you you need to get outside into nature to feel for improved mental health. Well, that again would have a economic benefit. Having, if we did say want to negate some of the carbon by planting more trees right now, having that as one of the what we're doing as a task force, planting trees, would have a mental health benefit. So that would be spending and saving on the NHS.
Councillor Morley.
I think just a general point is that the budget for this year has already been set, and as a fiscally responsible council, we cannot and will not exceed that budget. So anything that we do, and there are lots of things that we can do, the task force will be working cross-party and cross both councils, and we will be looking at quick wins that we can do now immediately that's going to save, help go towards saving our planet.
Just interrupt. I do feel that the level of debate here has gone completely off track, because surely everyone is entitled to say what they want to say, and then the proposer of the motion and the seconder surely has the opportunity to then answer all of those questions. At the moment, it seems as if those, I mean, I'm losing track here. So I just feel that the procedure of the debate has gone a bit off track. Obviously, we're absolutely supporting what is being proposed, but I really would like to hear the answers to those questions in a clear and precise way when they can be picked up by those proposer and the second.
Thank you, Councillor Otten. They will have a chance to answer the questions at the end, should they wish to. This is a debate. Oh, yeah, a debate on the amendment. Councillor Geek. Sorry, it's Councillor Pratt.
Okay, yeah, bringing us back then onto the debate about finding tangible benefits for this motion, and to not sort of constrain spending which is needed to sort of meet those goals that you're proposing. Climate change will indefinitely and inevitably cause loss of biodiversity, and therefore ecosystem functions which translate into ecosystem services. Those bring with them social, environmental and economic benefits to us, okay, which we have already mentioned. So it does carry a significant economic cost. If we degrade our ecosystems and erode these ecosystem services, okay, we will not be able to, we wouldn't be able to replace them. These services are being valued, actually, and ecological economists estimate the value of global ecosystem services at $145 trillion per year. That is a value far higher than the world's combined global economic output published by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. So what I would ask is that we support this amendment to not put such an emphasis on a so-called tangible economic return, but to actually foresee the economic returns that is going to make in the future going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Byrne.
I'm unsure what it is I'm allowed to say at this point, but
We're discussing the amendment.
Sorry?
Discussing the amendment.
Yes, indeed. Well, the amendment, pure and simple. I would like to say I think it would prove to be counterproductive to try to pin this phrase down too much. I don't think we on this side, I don't think the proposer is talking about it purely and simply in fiscal terms. I think saving can be interpreted in all sorts of ways. Any effort that's made, any expenditure that we can afford is going to have a saving effect on the planet that we're hoping to look after and conserve. So please don't try to be over-prescriptive about what this phrase means.
Councillor Fleming. Hang on. She can't really come back until the end. You can't come back until the end.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Councillor Mattison.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to refer to the timescales question and that, you know, we have a budget for this year, fiscal responsibility. The problem is that we've got 11 years to get onto a track of steeply reducing emissions, climate changing emissions of all sorts, not just carbon actually, and it doesn't fit well with local authority timescales. It's an emergency. We may need to move quicker than that. We can't wait for the joint local plan to be adopted, for example. We need to actually be squeezing now to get changes started now. And I hope the task force will be working to that end. Really, that is why we don't want... spend to save is a phrase from the old transition budget, that with the fund that we used to have, which has changed its name now, and therefore everybody thinks of it, those of us that are here would think of it purely in those terms, unfortunately, and that's a pity. And I think we've probably spelled out clearly enough that we know what we're trying to save. We're trying to save the planet, not just this year's budget.
Thank you. Councillor Geek.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to welcome Councillor Byrne's very wise and calming words that what we're trying to save, as in the words of Councillor Matheson, is the planet and not money. It's just that spend and save is so ambiguous. And in the words of Councillor Stringer, if this was to have a net cost, if some action was to have a net cost of say, just £1, would that, the words at the moment could be interpreted in such a loose way as to suggest that we would not be able to support it as a council. And I think we just don't want to have a hostage to fortune in this way. And so I would urge you, with all your wonderful, fine words that have come from this, your side of the chamber, to take out what's essentially an ambiguous and dangerous piece of wording.
Councillor Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to reiterate, and it's funny because as the explanation of the phrase has gone on, my fear has increased and not decreased. Because, for instance, we're looking for some quick wins because we're bound by this year's budget. I'm thinking, hang on, by 2030, every single one of those refuse freighters we've got out there have got to be doing all of their work carbon neutral, let alone missing a few houses out. They've got to be running off renewables. That is a massive task. So, I'm sorry, there might not be many quick wins. What there's got to be is some substantial longer-term planning. So that's why the spend to save thing, it depends on what time frame, depends if we're including the planet in this, and I totally get that. So I'm not happy with the spirit of the word. I'd quite like to, you know, I will be supporting the amendment. I'll encourage others to do it. It might not. But don't let anyone think if I support the amendment that I'm not supporting what I think we're collectively getting to as an understanding of what this actually means. But you can understand why we're a bit twitchy about the hostage to fortune because of perhaps some of the explanations that we've had today. Thank you.
Right, we're going to have two more speakers and then we're going to go to Councillor Warboys to sum up. So Councillor Mansell.
Sorry, I think what I wanted to say has already been said, so I won't waste.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very, very brief. Can I thank Councillor Byrne for his words that it is impossible to tie down what spend to save means. The only alternative to leaving it in is to take it out. And I agree with him, we need to take it out.
So Councillor Warboys, would you like to sum up on the amendment?
I will sum up very briefly. I think it's been aired very thoroughly, and as Councillor Stringer says, as the debate has continued, the ambiguity of this phrase has been expanded upon. It isn't about not being fiscally responsible. I am not suggesting that the council should spend more than it can afford to do. What I am concerned is the direction in which the council's efforts go and the way in which we meet this challenge. It is going to, the implications of a climate emergency are profound. They affect everything from planning to the way we travel to our meetings, to development, to the use of energy, biodiversity, the advice we give our parishioners. And I would not like to see something being told to me that this isn't a good idea because it does not have a sound economic return. We are not going to save money by taking this measure, but we may be improving our environment and our futures, our children's futures. We don't have the rights, perhaps, to say we cannot spend now in order to save their futures.
Right, Councillor Fleming, would you like to sum up?
Yes. On the amendment. I hate to say it, but I think it's disingenuous of the opposition to think that the council would withhold doing something that made complete sense for quality of life just because it cost a little bit. I don't think that is going to be the case. We have a motion here that is reflected in the motions passed by other local authorities in Suffolk and actually around the country. The wording in Suffolk is the same. Now, I don't want to deviate from the wording that Suffolk County Council has proposed and other local authorities have proposed. We need to work together on this. If we put a spanner in the works, it's going to actually be counterproductive to the objectives that we all want to achieve. And I cannot accept your amendment. Everything else you say, you know, it's indisputable. We need to take some action. But I think your amendment is just simply not helpful to that cause. And you must understand that as Green people who believe in actually taking some action, that these kind of trip-ups, actually what they are, these, you know, costed impediments to doing things, don't help us. So I am not accepting the amendment. Thank you.
So we're now going to vote on the amendment. So all those in favour? And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16.
The amendment is lost. So we will now go back to the substantive motion. Has anyone got anything else to say? Councillor Geek.
Thank you, Chair.
The national, oh dear, I'm not very good with acronyms on a hot day. Let's just go back to the acronym. The NPPF, it states that the joint local plan should help shape places in ways that contribute to radical reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, minimise our vulnerability and improve our resilience. The head of policy of the Town and Country Planning Association said last year that any plan made now that does not consider climate change and energy as central themes will simply not be fit for purpose. Now, the joint local plan takes us up to 2036. That is well beyond 2030. So can I just urge us all in our deliberations on this motion, can we consider also whether our new joint local plan will contribute to our becoming carbon neutral or just tinker around the edges? That's the first thing. I know that's not for today, that's for the joint local plan, but if we accept this, then we've got to think about that. The other thing that I would like to say is that given Councillor Morley's response to Councillor Pratt, can we now assume that all of you lovely people opposite who have said such marvellous things today and who have commended this motion in quite strong terms, that you'll all respond to the consultation on the Ipswich Northern Relief Road by saying that it should not be built and that the money should be instead spent on cycling, walking and public transport, because that is the only way that we will become the greenest county and carbon neutral by 2030.
Yeah. So, Councillor Fleming, would you like to sum up, or should we go straight to the vote?
I think we should go straight to the vote, actually. Thank you.
So, all those in favour of the substantive motion? Right, that's unanimous and carried. Thankfully. So moving on to 14B, the motion on notice received from Councillor Eburn. I would like to invite Councillor Eburn to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Chair. Given the vote that we've just had, we've all in this chamber agreed the importance of acting now, and what is really vital is what we as a district can do. You'll see the motion in your papers, and what we're asking for the council to do is to pledge that a task force reviews recognised and potential wildlife corridors in the district and brings forward proposals to enhance these corridors. That we also pledge for additional arboricultural and biodiversity advisory resources are made available as necessary to both support the task force, provide more input to support planning officers, strengthen the role of the public realm team and provide advice to parishes and other community landowners. And that to do this, additional resources are applied during this financial year 2019-2020 and are funded, if not available from the current budget, then from the Growth and Efficiency Fund, and that they're considered for the budget in future years. This whole motion comes up more and more frequently at the moment. It's raised at parish council meetings, biodiversity is mentioned in planning committees and in discussions with the public. And we need to ensure that we're acting on it now, and we are doing everything that we can to improve the biodiversity. Now, this can be the simplest of things, leaving grass uncut. How many of you have had discussions about verges, about leaving areas of village greens uncut to allow wildflowers to grow and the biodiversity to improve? It's about allowing green corridors to be left alongside new developments. It's about us putting forward proposals to ensure new developments themselves cater for this, whether this is hedgehog highways or green roofs. But we can't do this with no resource. And what we need to do is support our senior management in planning for a well-resourced team to make this possible. So I urge everybody in this chamber to support this motion, and to this end, I propose the motion and ask for a seconder. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder?
I would like to second the motion and outline my reasons. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. So the Council recognises the threat posed by climate change to human security. biodiversity loss is compounded by climate change, but it is coupled to the change and intensification of the way that we use our land. In the last century, Suffolk has lost 96% of species-rich grasslands, up to 80% of hedgerows, and 10% of its ancient woodlands. And with that, numerous species of wildflowers, butterflies, and other invertebrates. This highlights not only the need to safeguard and strengthen existing designated and county wildlife sites, but to identify new opportunities to support threatened species and enhance the connectivity of habitats. Our new task force would advise planning officers in the incorporation of green infrastructure, such as green walls and green roofs, at the earliest stages of development proposals, as recommended in the revised planning practice guidance. Working with local nature partnerships, they will also identify opportunities to create new sites and enhance existing ones, and plan for optimal use of that space. These spaces will provide invaluable benefits to human well-being, health, and livelihoods. For example, species-rich meadows, as we've mentioned, plays a fundamental role in purifying our water, recycling organic litter and nutrients, and pollination. Road verges and 2/3 of amenity grassland are close mown, but plans to allow wildflowers to flourish in these sites is gaining popularity. There is also opportunity for riparian planting and restoration along the rivers Rat and Gipping to improve water quality and restore habitat diversity. So members of the public have been forthcoming in their support for these measures, and these are just a couple of really simple ways in which we could strengthen the nature recovery network as set out in the government's 25-year environmental plan. This year, the World Wildlife Fund reported that 56 species, that's 25% of Suffolk's bees, are either threatened or a conservation concern. Now, as we all know, of course, bees pollinate wild plants and crops and are vital to our local economy. These benefits are also known as ecosystem services, which I touched on earlier. The revised Natural Environment Guidance Papers endorses an ecosystem services approach to valuing these services. Our new biodiversity officers could play a pivotal role in implementing this plan through collating biodiversity data and helping planners incorporate the value of ecosystems to inform decision-making processes. And I'll just finish on the point that averting a dramatic decay of biodiversity and the subsequent loss of ecosystem services is still possible through considerate planning and intensified conservation efforts, but that window of opportunity is rapidly closing. So I would like to ask you all to vote for this motion to give the Council the support it needs to fulfil our sustainability goals going forward and put Suffolk on the map as the UK's greenest county. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now the matter is open for debate. Councillor Guthrie.
Yes, thank you. Obviously a lot of things you've said there. For example, the bees. I'm fortunate enough to live next to a farmer who's just planted 6 acres specifically for the bees, and it is most important. I was also rather saddened this morning to be out at 7 o'clock in the morning to see a hedgehog flattened on the road in front of me, which was really sad. We do need to assist the wildlife. But one thing I do ask everybody, including Suffolk County Council, to take note that ragwort is poisonous to grazing animals, cattle, horses, donkeys, etc. So we do need to be a bit careful about what we do and we don't cut. Thank you.
Councillor Stringer?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll be supporting this motion. Apologies to those of you that come to another chamber. I'm going to use an anecdote I've already used here. When I was born in 1964, my parents used to play music to get me to go to sleep because apparently I was a bit of a rowdy child. And one of the singles they used to play was by a band called the Beatles, which you're probably familiar with. John, Paul, George and Ringo. Since 1964, when I was born, we've lost 2 of those Beatles. We've lost 50%. We've also lost 50% of the species of beetles on this planet. We need to look at this very, very seriously. And I think it's quite interesting, those of you... We had a drive round after a planning committee with Councillor Barker to look at previous mistakes and good points about what had been built. And I think that was some of those trips were, did visit good practice, and some where there was, frankly, horrific practice, where there wasn't a centimetre left unconcreted. And you know that the quality of life of those people living there is going to be diminished by that. So I think there is an important role for us, but of course you've got to get the story straight. If you're heading towards a developer to saying, by the way, I want you to put a hedgehog hole in that fence, all you need to remind them is it's actually less material you need to use. That's one little bit less of fence you need to put in. Actually, it's less material, so therefore it could be of cost benefit to you. So I think we need to make sure that we get this on track. There are some good examples. I mean, Suffolk farmers have been trying to reverse the depletion in bumblebees and other bees. But in isolation, little pockets in isolation is great, but what we need to do is form those corridors everywhere so that everywhere can join up. And along with our Tree for Life scheme, which we kicked off last year, which I'm not sure if that was a spend to save model, but it's certainly giving us a huge amount of benefit in terms of kudos with the public, as well as spreading some biodiversity out there into the general public and hopefully pollinating bees. Thank you.
Councillor Eppingham.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Of course, we are all very keen to improve the climate, but I think we've just recently had a very successful food and drink festival in Stowmarket. And one of the things that struck me about that was the wide range of produce and other products that came from Suffolk. And if we're going to be very serious about how we help the economy, how we help climate change, and so on, we can at least start by making sure that we buy stuff that's local. And if we can't buy it from Suffolk, at least let's buy it from Britain. And I think that would help our farming friends as well as the rest of us. And I commend you to think about that as we move forward.
Councillor Humphrey.
Madam Chair, thank you. I think all your points are relevant and well said, actually. I definitely support your motion. I'll get that in the open right now because I think all your points are relevant. But let's not beat ourselves up too much. We do a good job in Mid Suffolk. On the planning, the chairmans, the actual committee members, we do our very best to make sure that developers follow that path for biodiversity, for green, for everything else that's good in the world. So we're not, we don't just go, yeah, go and build, just concrete the world. Actually, we do our very best to prevent that. And really, we should do more. But we can only do that together. And if you've got good ideas, let's share those good ideas and let's move forward. The other good thing is, I drove from Stowmarket to here. Now, one of the most sort of carbon areas are our main roads. The A12 is a classic, the A14 as well. Now, we've got lots of traffic down there. We still need roads, by the way, so when we get electric cars, they'll still need to drive on roads. So the Northern Bypass, I think we might still need it. That's another subject. But I drove down that road, and this is where all that carbon is generated locally. And for 75% of that whole journey from Stowmarket to the Asda turn-off, I can pretty much say there were constant lines of trees, constant. And where the trees were missing, for the extra 20%, there were hedgerows, and there's 5% of nothing. What we need to do collectively is fill that 5% with trees. Luckily, the government has released funding and a really good project to plant over 1 million trees. And I get your point about China, but don't forget they're also building 6 cities a day. So we all need to work together to improve things. But I think down on planning, we're doing our best. With this motion, I think we're going to do a little bit more. And yeah, I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Councillor Fleming.
Thank you. Yes, I will be supporting this motion. I think anyone who knows me knows that how important I rank biodiversity and ecosystem management, how highly important they are to us achieving a quality of life and also our climate change objectives. So yes, I will be supporting this, and I just want to throw in an idea about, I picked this letter out actually to draw attention today to the fact that the Civil Engineering Contractors Association has written to Lord Gardner about non-native species and biodiversity in the construction sector. And I will distribute it to councillors because there's some very interesting reading here. We're missing a lot of invasive species that are coming in through various means. But at the assessment stage, and this is a planning issue, we need to put more effort into training people to recognise things that, other than just a narrow range of species that everyone looks for, because there are a much wider range of both animal and plant creatures being brought in that are very destructive and are being missed. We also have the Port of Felixstowe in Suffolk, which is a major corridor for bringing invasive species into this country. So these are the sort of things that I think we as a council and as a country can really work to improve. So yes, I look forward to putting some teeth in this motion.
Councillor Eben, would you like to sum up before our vote? Come on then, Dave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The motion we're considering here contributes positively and powerfully to the previous one we've just agreed to. It is, in my opinion, a vital part of protecting not only our natural world for its own sake, but also for the value of its contribution to our own health and well-being. And, let's face it, the health of the planet as a whole. We are running out of time, though, and if we are to beat this thing, we should all be working in earnest now. The motion's been brought by members on the other side of this chamber, but I have absolutely no hesitation in supporting it wholeheartedly. Playing politics for its own part playing politics for its own sake has no part in this. We're all equally affected by these threats. We should be working equally to combat them. I am unashamedly a Conservative with a capital C, but I am also, with a lowercase g, as green as a cabbage through and through.
Councillor Eben, would you like to sum up?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank everybody for their contributions and their words of wisdom in support of this motion. And I hope that what we can do is actually see some real benefits to Mid Suffolk, and particularly in what we do in planning and what we do in housing, and to start work on this straight away. And I would hope that we can get something going immediately and be able to report back within the next few months and not waste time. But I'd urge everyone to support the motion. Thank you again.
Right, all those in favour of the motion? I think that's unanimous. Right, agenda item 12, the Capital Investment Fund Trading CIFCO Capital Business Ltd, Business Trading and Performance Report. Before we commence, can I ask members to ensure they refrain from asking any questions that relate to any information that is in the exempt papers until the meeting moves into closed session. It is also my intention to move the recommendations and vote on them in open session. Therefore, there may be a need to move from open to closed session and then back again. Thank you. I would like to invite Councillor Brewster, Chair of Mid Suffolk District Council, Suffolk Holdings Limited, to introduce this paper and move the recommendations in the report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, this report sets out CIFCO Capital Ltd, broadly known as purely CIFCO, trading activity in 2018 to 19. Reporting performance against key performance indicators set in the previous year's business plan. The report confirms that the first tranche of investment was completed in March 2019, creating a portfolio which delivers a net initial yield of 5.75%, generating a net income after costs to Baber and Mid Suffolk of 1.4 million per annum. Appended to the report in confidential Appendix A is the draft business plan for 2019 to 20, which sets the targets and investment criteria for the forthcoming year. The business plan has been prepared by the Board of CIFCO in consultation with its fund managers, Jones Lang LaSalle. It has been approved by the Council holding companies and endorsed by the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It was also approved by Baber District Council earlier this week. The business plan forms an important part of the governance of the company. It is in the confidential papers due to the confidential tenant lease information it contains. However, the majority of the information regarding the strategy and finances of CIFCO have been included within the supporting paper on the open agenda. The Managing Director, Emily Atack, the Chair of CIFCO, Chris Hayworth, and Nigel Golder from Jones Land LaSalle, who I welcome those members here, and they are here to answer any questions, and I propose these in open session unless they relate to specific tenant lease terms. I would therefore like to propose that the recommendations set out in the section 3 of this report are approved, and I seek a seconder, please.
Could I have a seconder?
Madam Chairman, I'm happy to second that motion.
Thank you. Councillor Mansell?
Thank you. I would like to suggest, I don't know whether it has to be a formal proposal or not, or whether I could just suggest that the two recommendations, 3.1 and 3.2, can be voted on separately, because I think they are very different recommendation.
It's up to you. It's up to you. No, it's up to you. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, fair enough. It's now open for debate and questions. Councillor Mansell.
I do have a question, and it does relate to a page reference in the confidential papers, so I don't think it refers to anything financial specifically. But now, I'm sorry, I'm using the online version. I don't think the page numbers are the same. On my version, it's page 66 in section 8. And it talks about, if I can just find that page so I know what I'm talking about, sorry. It talks about the key investment criteria, and I just wondered whether we could just hear, it does say that they haven't been changed fundamentally, and I just wondered whether we could hear what the original, or how different they are from the original investment criteria, because obviously they're changing in this business plan.
Emily, would you like to answer this?
Good evening. The investment criteria is set out in section 8 of the business plan. The fundamental changes were probably in relation to the target yield, which there was a slight adjustment. So the previous business plan, the target yield was 6%, whereas in the proposed business plan, the target yield is 5.75%. That was largely to reflect our experience from the market over the last trading year, that 5.75% was more realistic. We also looked at the lot size, and there is a slight change in lot size, but that's really to reflect the size of the portfolio rather than a change in the principles. So the principles remain the same, but in terms of the portfolio, we were looking at 2 tranches of 50 million, so 100 million portfolio, so as to reflect that. The other detailed changes were probably in relation to the sectors that we were looking to invest in, and they showed probably moving towards investing more in industrial properties and office properties and alternative sectors, whereas previously we had a little bit more weighting in the retail sector, and again that was to reflect the market's performance over the last 12 months. I don't know if Nigel Golder wants to add anything further. Don't have to.
No, thank you. I would just support exactly what Emily said. It's factually correct. The reason why the target yield has changed slightly is that the portfolio has become less it's become more risk diverse. So we have, as a consequence, lowered the yield target by a fraction, but it also reflects where the current commercial property market sits as well.
Thank you. Councillor Field?
Yes, just trying to avoid the problems with the pink papers. I wanted to ask a question about the revaluation comments that are made. Is that allowable at the moment?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Basically then, you talk about a revaluation of properties and a number of charges that were made for things. I seem to remember it says things like tax, which have resulted in a 3.1 million loss to the accounts. I just wondered if you'd like to explain that in a little more detail.
So the paper on the open agenda sets out that CIFCO has made a loss of approximately 3.1 million over the last trading year. That figure is broken down, has two main components. So the first is in respect of the costs that have been incurred to date in acquiring the asset. So they could be seen as setup costs. So they include stamp duty and professional fees for acquiring the assets. The amount that relates to that is approximately 1.5 million. The other 1.5 million relates to the revaluation of the portfolio. So the portfolio will be revalued on an annual basis, and so that will reflect the fluctuations in capital value in the market. So the portfolio was revalued in March, and there was a downwards valuation of approximately 1.5 million. This downwards valuation was primarily as a result of a reduction in value in the retail properties that had been acquired, largely due to market sentiment towards retail investment properties in the market. So the income and the tenants in place is still maintained. There aren't any current risks in relation to that, but the market as a whole is assessing that retail properties are less attractive to acquire, and as such that has had an impact on the capital value of those properties. The downwards valuation of the portfolio is in the order of 3%, and in terms of the retail assets performance against other market properties, their performance has actually been better than other properties in the market. So that reduction in value that we've seen on those retail assets, other retail assets have actually seen a more significant reduction in value. Does that help to answer your questions?
I think so, but the way I interpret it, that then is the capital value has gone down by about twice the amount that you've received from rentals. So currently we're sitting on a 1.5 million loss, is that correct?
The £1.5 million is income to the council after the council's borrowing costs, so that's income. The loss in the CIFCO accounts is effectively a capital loss, a book loss, so it doesn't affect the income that comes into the council through the rents that are being paid through CIFCO. So there is a difference. So I don't think it's as straightforward to offset the revenue against the capital loss. But I appreciate what you're saying. It's just not how I would interpret that.
Councillor Stringer.
Yeah, I have to say, the earlier question wasn't actually answered correctly. The original business plan for CIFCO had a small element of higher yielding, higher risk investments, which we never did because the market got a bit more volatile and edgy, so we decided not to do them. And we've denied that's happened all the way through. We've had to drag this out of various portfolio holders to actually get that information. And now when the direct question is asked, what is the difference between this business case and the original one, it's that the higher risk investments have been airbrushed out. That's fine. At least can we please say that's what we've done?
I'm happy to say that. I'm sorry I didn't pick that reference up from your question earlier. I wasn't deliberately trying to avoid that. So the board of CIFCO has made a conscious decision to avoid the more riskier assets in the market, and that has resulted in a lower yielding but safer property portfolio. That was something that the board continues to assess on a monthly basis when looking at opportunities, but it was felt that that was the appropriate action to be taken. We continue to assess that. The other factor in relation to that is really the performance of the market. So as the prime yields for better quality, more secure assets lower effectively, so the price increases against the rent, you see a similar shift with secondary properties, so that those secondary properties that are higher risk actually become more expensive, and so the risk and reward return isn't proportionate. So at this point in the market, it hasn't been appropriate to invest in those properties because the reward hasn't been sufficient to compensate the risk that we were taking. The Board of CIFCO will continue to review its criteria for investments and the strategy moving forward, but it does need to be agile and adaptable to the market conditions. So I hope that answers that inquiry.
Councillor Otten.
Thank you. Reading the report and the report from the Scrutiny Committee, there are obviously some very sensible questions about the impact of Brexit. And at 6.19, the statement there says, however, overall markets have been confident, but matters are likely to improve once it has become known how Brexit will be attained. At the moment, members, I feel completely unaware of just how Brexit will be contained. In the further report, it appears that the Board of Directors are very confident that there will be no drastic result of any no deal. And I hope that we do not sit here in the future months with these investments which have been badly affected by the uncertainty and the possibility of the new Prime Minister taking us out with no deal. Thank you.
Is there any other questions? Councillor Ebert.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got two questions, if I may. Firstly, on the key performance indicators at section 5, I note that of the three main indicators, they were all just not quite met. I just wanted to get a view on whether there was going to be any adjustment to those or changes to how, to which indicators we were looking at. And then secondly, if I may, at 10.3, if someone could just explain in a little bit more detail the fees that are being, that come with CIFCO Capital and the increases, and could they just confirm whether the increase in fees is to do with increase because it's a percentage or because there have been actual changes in those fees that are being added to the CIFCO portfolio? Thank you very much.
If I can respond just on the point of fees initially. So the figures that are set out in 10.3 are an estimate of what fees potentially and costs could be moving forward, assuming that the portfolio grows in size. So fees are a percentage of the portfolio value, so there is a connection between those two elements. With regard to the key performance indicators, I'm just trying to find the section in the report with the updated KPIs. So you just bear with me for 1 second. So I believe that I think it's section 8 within the business plan of the revised KPIs. So in terms of the yield performance, so that reduces to the 5.75. But if you just bear with me 1 second, I'll just have a quick flick through to check I've got the right section. My fingers are too hot. Here we go. Apologies, it's actually section 12 of the business plan, and that sets out the proposed key performance indicators for 2019-2020. So you'll see from that there's a reduction in the net initial yield. We're also suggesting that we use the equivalent yield as a performance measure. The equivalent yield helps to show the performance of the portfolio as a whole, not just the acquisition yield, which is what the net yield is effectively. It also looks at performance against the 24-month period for completing the second phase of funding. And we've also introduced a further KPI, which is looking at rent arrears as well. So those are the proposed KPIs for the next financial year.
Any other questions? Councillor Brewster, would you like to sort of sum up?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I mean, there have been some excellent questions asked, and I believe that the answers have been very forthcoming. I would just go back to the question of what is perceived as the loss, a paper loss technically, and I would remind councillors that actually that isn't a loss of rent at all. The rents are forthcoming, they are sound covenants. And I think once before in this chamber, I mentioned when we were receiving training from James Joan Lascelles that there was a straight line at the purchase price of the acquisition. Obviously, at times, the price will dupe down if there is a little bit of pressure or recession or anything like that. And if we don't have to sell the property for any reason, properties go below that line, they come up above the line. And provided you're not selling, it's not a loss. So I would just remind members of that. But thank you, Madam Chairman, and I will let you continue.
Okay, so we'll move to a vote. We'll take the first two recommendations, 3.1 and 3.2. Just 3.1. Just 3.1, was it? Okay, well, just 3.1 then. The Council notes CIFCO Capital Ltd trading activity and performance from the year to end April 2019. All those in favour? That's unanimous. So 3.2 and 3.3 together? Oh, right, sorry. So that's just 3.2. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried then. Thank you. And so the date of the next meeting is Thursday, the 26th of September. And I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that I'm having my Chairman's Charity on the 31st of August at Wingfield Barns, and I'd kindly like you all to attend, please. But I'm happy to take cash as a donation for Home Start. Thanks very much. The meeting's closed.